MGM did not just make Judy Garland famous, it learned how to use her. They sold Dorothy as the girl America wanted to protect, while turning the teenager behind her into a controlled asset. Weighed, restricted, overworked, and given pills so the cameras could keep rolling. The public got over the rainbow. The studio got a brand that kept making money. Judy got a body other people managed. So the question is not why Judy Garland struggled. It is who kept approving a system that made her struggle profitable. You're watching Hollywood Dark Secrets, where the studio story ends and the people behind it have to answer. Before the ruby slippers, before the yellow brick road, before Dorothy became one of the safest images in American film, Judy Garland was Frances Ethel Gumm. She was born in Grand Rapids, Minnesota, into a family where entertainment was not a dream. It was work. Her father, Frank Gumm, ran a theater. Her mother, Ethel, pushed the family act forward with the force of someone who saw no clean line between a child's talent and a family survival. Frances stood beside her sisters in the Gumm Sisters Act, while most children her age were learning how to be private, bored, messy, and protected. She learned timing. She learned how to smile when strangers watched. She learned that a room could change the moment she opened her mouth. The audience saw a little girl with a huge voice. The adults around her saw a booking, a paycheck, a way out, and a small body carrying too much adult hope. That difference matters, because applause can feel warm to a child. But it can also become a leash when the adults holding it decide the child cannot stop. The first machine that controlled Frances was not MGM. It was home. Ethel Gumm has often been described as a stage mother, but that phrase is too soft for what Judy later said about her. Later accounts portray Ethel as pushing Frances to perform through fatigue, treating her talent less like a gift than a family resource. If Frances sang well, the room softened. If she hesitated, the pressure came back. A child does not understand exploitation in legal language. She understands faces. She understands when adults smile and when their faces go cold. She understands that love can feel available one moment and withdrawn the next. That is how a child learns to perform before she learns to choose. Judy later called her mother the real villain of the story. That statement should not be treated like a throwaway insult. It came from a woman looking back at the first person who taught her that being tired did not matter if the show still needed a voice. The pills entered the story before MGM had full possession of her life. Later biographies and accounts say Ethel gave her daughters pills to keep them awake for performances and pills to make them sleep afterward. The wording around those pills could sound ordinary in that period. Something to help, something to calm down, something to get through a difficult night. But a child's nervous system is not a stage light. It cannot be switched on for the audience and switched off when the adults are finished selling tickets. Frances learned early that exhaustion was not a valid objection. It was a problem to be managed. If her body slowed down, chemistry could push it forward. If her mind would not settle, chemistry could pull it down. MGM did not invent the pattern from nothing. The studio found a child who had already been trained to place the schedule above her own body. That early training is the part many people skip when they ask why Judy did not simply say no later. Refusal is not automatic. Boundaries have to be protected before they can be defended. Frances was taught the opposite. Her body did not decide. Her hunger did not decide. Her sleep did not decide. The adults did. By the time Frances became Judy Garland, the stage had already taken part of her childhood and replaced it with obedience. The new name was cleaner than Frances Gum, brighter on a poster, easier for an industry that liked to sand down real people until they could be sold. But the name did not give her freedom. It gave the business a better label. Frances was a child. Judy Garland was a product line waiting for a studio to claim it. In 1935, MGM signed her when she was 13 years old. The studio liked the voice immediately. That voice was large, direct, emotional, and startlingly mature. It could fill a room without needing a glamorous face attached to it. But MGM was not built to protect unusual children. It was built to package them. The studio saw the voice as valuable and the body around it as a problem. Judy was not the tall, polished, glossy young woman MGM usually knew how to display. She was short, youthful, anxious, open-faced, and painfully eager to be approved. A healthier studio might have recognized that vulnerability and protected it. MGM studied it. The people in charge understood that a young performer desperate to be accepted could be controlled. A confident teenager might ask questions. A frightened one would work until she collapsed and then apologize for the delay. MGM did not simply give Judy a job. It gave her a daily life. The studio lot became the place where she worked, studied, rehearsed, waited, and was judged. A normal teenager might come home from school and disappear into a bedroom. Judy came home to another instruction. Stand here, try this dress, sing it again, smile wider, do not eat that, be ready tomorrow. That is what made the control so complete. It was not one cruel moment. It was routine. The same people who praised her voice could also discuss her weight as if her body were studio property. The same studio that called itself a family could turn a child's insecurity into a management tool. Judy did not need to be locked in a room to understand the message. She only had to learn that approval came when she obeyed. Louis B. Mayer understood fear as a management tool. He sold MGM as a family, but inside that family, he played father, judge, banker, and owner. That was dangerous for Judy, especially after her own father passed away soon after she arrived at the studio. Mayer stepped into a space that was already wounded. He could insult her, then comfort her. He could make her feel worthless, then make MGM appear to be the only place that would ever protect her. That kind of control does not always need a raised voice. Sometimes it works through a closed office door, a large desk, a contract, and the knowledge that the man across from you can decide whether you work again. Judy was a child inside a business that treated childhood as a marketing category. The insults became part of the control. Later accounts say Mayer called her my little hunchback. Other studio stories describe people mocking her weight and appearance with the phrase fat little pig with pigtails, following the Garland story for decades. Whether each line was spoken in the exact form later repeated is less important than the pattern behind them. Judy was made to feel physically wrong in the very place that controlled her image. Those insults were pressure points. If she believed she was unattractive, she would believe MGM was doing her a favor by keeping her. If she believed she was lucky to be wanted, she would accept more dieting, more hours, more pills, more correction, more humiliation. Shame became studio equipment. A girl who hates her reflection is easier to reshape. MGM surrounded her with cameras, wardrobe fittings, weigh-ins, mirrors, and constant talk about her body. Her face was discussed. Her waist was discussed. Her hair was discussed. Her posture, teeth, appetite, and energy were discussed. Nothing about her felt off limits to the people who managed the image. She was compared to more conventionally glamorous young women on the lot and made to understand that she was not in their category. That wound later became part of what audiences loved about her. Judy looked like someone trying to be chosen. She sounded like someone trying to prove she deserved to stay. The public heard sincerity. The studio heard market value. Her ache sold. Food became another place where MGM exercised control. Judy was placed on harsh diets while she was still growing. Accounts describe meals reduced to things like black coffee, chicken soup, cottage cheese, and small portions that could never properly feed a working teenager. Cigarettes were also used to suppress appetite. The point was not health. The point was camera control. MGM wanted the voice full and the body small. It wanted emotion large and appetite invisible. A teenage girl working long days should have been hungry. MGM treated hunger like disobedience. If she reached for the wrong food, someone could correct her. If her weight shifted, someone could shame her. Her body made the studio money, but she was not allowed to treat that body as her own. The cigarette detail cuts deep because it shows how twisted the logic became. MGM sold innocence while encouraging habits that damage the child behind the image. Smoke so you do not eat. Take a pill so you do not slow down. Take another pill so you can sleep. Wake up and look fresh. Smile like an untouched American girl. The public saw Judy as natural because the studio hid the unnatural machinery behind her image. The more controlled she became, the more effortless she was expected to appear. That was the business model. Hide the labor, sell the glow. The cruelty was also ordinary. It could look like someone watching her plate. It could sound like a casual comment before a fitting. It could be a joke about her size, followed by a reminder that the camera would see everything. None of this had to look dramatic from the outside. That was part of the problem. The damage was built into normal studio behavior. For Judy, food was no longer just food. Rest was no longer just rest. Even her face became something other people corrected. A teenager is supposed to change. Judy was expected to stay useful. The workdays pushed the body harder. Judy grew up inside the studio musical system, where rehearsal, recording, wardrobe, schooling, publicity, retakes, and more rehearsal could crush the day into one long demand. A musical number that looked light on screen could mean hours of repeated movement under hot lights. A smile had to be held after the body had already used up its strength. A voice had to sound alive even when the person behind it was running on fumes. When she slowed down, the system did not ask what had been taken from her. It asked how quickly she could be made ready again. That is where the doctors came in. In theory, doctors protect bodies. At MGM, they also protected schedules. The use of stimulants and sleeping pills in old Hollywood has been reported again and again because it was part of the production culture. Uppers kept performers moving. Downers forced rest when the work was done. Inside the machine, the pills were treated as production tools. Judy's body was pushed into a rhythm no healthy teenager should have had to maintain. She was not resting on a human rhythm anymore. Her body was being trained around the studio schedule. MGM benefited when the pills kept her awake, camera ready, smiling, and available. Then blamed her when the same chemical cycle left her unstable, late, or unable to function. The system created the condition, then punished the symptom. Judy became known as difficult. But difficult is a word that hides too much. It hides the diet. It hides the exhaustion. It hides the pills. It hides the adults who approved the schedule and then acted surprised when the human body finally pushed back. Then came The Wizard of Oz. America remembers blue gingham, ruby slippers, a small dog, a yellow road, and a girl singing toward somewhere better. But the girl playing Dorothy was 16 years old, and MGM needed her to seem younger. The studio built Dorothy by suppressing Judy's teenage body. Wardrobe, makeup, and later accounts of tight binding all point to the same goal: keep her inside the image of a Kansas child. Judy's natural development was treated like a production problem. Over the Rainbow works because the longing is real. It is not just a beautiful song placed inside a fantasy film. It is a young performer giving sound to a private need the studio did not intend to reveal. Judy sings about somewhere beyond reach, somewhere trouble might loosen, somewhere the pressure might stop. Audiences heard hope. They were not wrong. But the hope came from a girl who knew what it meant to be trapped by adults, contracts, diets, pills, and fear. The song was reportedly removed for a time during the editing process because some thought it slowed the picture down before it was restored. That detail tells you what they valued. The moment that carried the deepest human truth was almost removed as a pacing problem. The Wizard of Oz became immortal. That did not make Judy safe. It made her more valuable. Dorothy became one of the safest images in American film, and Judy became responsible for keeping that safety alive. The public wanted the girl it could protect. MGM wanted the performer it could keep working. Judy had to remain young enough for the fantasy, disciplined enough for the schedule, thin enough for the camera, and emotionally open enough to make the songs hurt. Dorothy could click her heels and go home. Judy had no home outside the system that had built her. That is why Dorothy became such a strange trap for Judy. The character was loved because she was simple, frightened, decent, and homesick. But Judy was not allowed the same simplicity. Dorothy could be lost and still be protected by a story. Judy could be lost and still be called late, difficult, or ungrateful. The audience wanted to believe the girl in the gingham dress was safe. MGM needed them to believe it. If the public had seen the pressure behind that image, the fantasy would have been harder to sell. So the studio kept the frame clean. Dorothy stayed young. Judy carried what the frame left out. The money did not match the myth. Judy was paid as a contracted performer, not as the owner of a cultural monument. The Wizard of Oz made her face permanent, but it did not make her free. A famous payroll story says Toto earned more than some human performers on the film. Judy carried the emotional center of the movie, but she still did not own Dorothy, the songs, the shoes, or the long future of the image. Fame meant strangers knew her name. Power would have meant control over her body, her time, her money, and her future. Judy had fame. MGM kept too much of the power. Around the same period, MGM had another valuable formula. Judy was not only becoming Dorothy. She was also being paired with Mickey Rooney in films that sold youth, energy, small-town romance, and clean American optimism. The formula looked harmless. Two young performers singing, dancing, solving problems, and turning barns into stages. But the cheerful surface hid the pressure underneath. Judy and Rooney were worked hard because the formula made money. The public saw young talent bursting with energy. The studio saw a reliable formula. If the formula slowed down, the doctors, coaches, handlers, and executives knew how to push the performers again. Those films kept Judy in the public's heart, but they also trapped her in permanent girlhood. The audience loved her as the vulnerable girl next door, while MGM still needed the product to remain familiar. If she looked too mature, gained weight, fell in love, or demanded rest, the image became harder to sell. The role was no longer only on screen, it had moved into her life. MGM also wanted control over romance. A star's private life could damage a public brand, and Judy's brand depended on innocence. She was sold as emotional, pure, young, and reachable. Real adult desire threatened that image. When she fell for bandleader Artie Shaw, she was badly hurt when he married Lana Turner, another MGM star. The emotional wound mattered because Judy had been taught to tie approval to being chosen. Losing Shaw was not just heartbreak. It struck the same place MGM had been striking for years. The fear that she was not beautiful enough, not wanted enough, not safe enough to be loved without conditions. Then came musician David Rose. Judy married him in 1941, young and hungry for shelter from the studio's pressure. A marriage should have been private. For Judy, it became a studio issue. A married Judy Garland was harder to sell as MGM's eternal girl. A pregnant Judy Garland was even harder. According to later biographical accounts, Judy reportedly became pregnant during that marriage, and pressure from her mother and people around the studio pushed her toward a decision that served the brand more than the person. The exact private details come through biographies and later reporting, so the wording has to stay careful. But the broader pattern is well documented across old Hollywood. Female stars' pregnancies were often treated as business emergencies when they interfered with contracts, image, or release schedules. Judy's private body was not treated as private. It was treated as part of the brand. The public never saw that pressure. It saw publicity, posters, songs, and MGM shine. Judy was expected to keep working while private pain disappeared behind the brand. Her marriage to David Rose could not survive that pressure. Judy had been trained since childhood to look for rescue in other people. First, her mother managed her. Then MGM managed her. Then men around her seemed to offer escape. But escape often came with another demand, another contract, another form of control. That pattern repeated through her life. The tragedy is not that Judy made imperfect choices. She did. The tragedy is that she was taught to make those choices from a place of damage. She kept looking for safety in the same kind of power that had hurt her. By the mid-1940s, Judy was no longer only MGM's young singing star. Meet Me in St. Louis gave her a more adult screen image and brought her close to director Vincente Minnelli, whom she married in 1945. Their daughter, Liza, was born the next year. On paper, she looked stable: star, wife, mother, still beloved. But a stable image was not the same as a stable life. Motherhood gave her something real, but it did not remove the studio demands or the dependency already built into her working life. By the late 1940s, the damage became harder to hide. In The Pirate, Easter Parade, and Summer Stock, Judy could still be sharp, funny, and fully present on screen. Get Happy remains one of her most controlled and electric MGM numbers. But behind that image was a performer struggling badly. The finished number looked healthy. The process behind it was not. Production problems mounted. She was cast in Annie Get Your Gun, then removed and replaced by Betty Hutton. She was cast in Royal Wedding, then removed and replaced by Jane Powell. The studio explanation was lateness, absence, unreliability. Those things were real. But they were not the whole truth. MGM had used her through childhood and adolescence, shaped her body, fed her insecurity, normalized pills, and trained her to ignore exhaustion. When the damage began interrupting production, the studio treated her as the problem. The same studio that had trained her to ignore exhaustion now treated exhaustion as misconduct. In 1950, MGM released her from the place that had controlled her since she was 13. That moment can sound like freedom if you say it too quickly. It was not freedom. It was abandonment. Judy had been raised to believe MGM was the only place that could hold her career together. Then the studio removed itself when she became inconvenient. After years of control, the hand opened, but it opened over empty ground. Around this period, she went through a severe private crisis that made the damage impossible to ignore. The details do not need to be used for shock. The meaning matters more. A woman trained to perform through pain had reached the point where her body forced the world to notice. MGM did not stop being responsible just because the contract ended. A factory cannot overwork a machine for years, ignore the heat, force it to keep running, then blame the machine when it fails. Judy's collapse was not separate from the studio story. It was part of the studio story. The same people who sold her as wholesome entertainment had participated in a system that left her physically dependent, emotionally starved, and financially vulnerable. Then they moved on to the next film, the next face, the next product. But Judy Garland was never only a victim. Damage was part of her story, but it was not the whole of her. After MGM, the live stage gave her a different kind of power. In London, especially at the Palladium, audiences did not see a studio-controlled Dorothy. They saw Judy Garland standing in real time with no retake to save her and no Technicolor frame to soften the edges. Her voice had changed, but the audience felt the truth in it. She no longer sounded like MGM's Dorothy. She sounded like Judy Garland. Her stage comeback proved something MGM never wanted to admit. Judy's value did not come only from the studio. It came from the person the studio had tried to control. She could stand outside the gates and still fill a room. She could sing without Dorothy's dress and still make people lean forward. She could take a standard and make it sound like a confession. That live power was dangerous because it belonged more directly to her. Not completely. Managers, husbands, promoters, and tax problems would still surround her. But on stage, for the length of a song, she could take back the room. Sid Luft entered the next chapter as husband, manager, producer, and fighter. He helped push A Star Is Born into existence, and without that push, the great comeback film may not have happened. Luft helped put her back in front of the camera, but he was not a clean savior. Their marriage mixed love, business, debt, ambition, and control. A Star is Born became the film that forced Hollywood to look at what it had done, even if only for a moment. Judy played Esther Blodgett, a singer pulled into fame while the man beside her falls apart. The story was fiction, but the emotional material was close to the bone. Judy understood the hunger to be chosen. She understood the fear of disappointing a room. She understood applause that could not save you afterward. When she sang "The Man That Got Away," it did not feel like a polished studio number. It felt like testimony. The voice was still controlled, musical, and professional, but underneath it was a woman who knew what loss had cost her. The film itself carried another wound. A Star is Born was ambitious, expensive, and built around her return. Then Warner Brothers cut the film after release, damaging the structure of the film and weakening the very vehicle that had restored her screen power. Even in Comeback, the business took something from her. Still, the performance survived the damage. Critics and audiences recognized that Judy had given one of the great screen performances. She was not pretending to know what collapse felt like. She had lived close enough to it to make every scene carry weight. The Academy nominated her for Best Actress. Many believed she would win. On Oscar night in 1955, Judy had recently given birth to her son, Joey. Reportedly, a television crew was set up in her hospital room, ready to capture the victory shot if her name was called. The room was wired for triumph before triumph had happened. Even motherhood became a possible broadcast event. Judy had just given birth, but the industry was already preparing to turn her body, face, and reaction into content. That hospital room detail matters because it shows how little privacy fame had left her. If she won, her face would become a broadcast moment. If she lost, the room stopped being useful. The cameras were not there for Judy as a new mother. They were there for the image of Judy winning. That was the pattern again. When her pain could become performance, Hollywood leaned in. When her pain needed care, Hollywood stepped back. Then Grace Kelly won for The Country Girl. Judy's name was not called. The cameras lost interest immediately. The crew packed up and left. That image has lasted because it is so plain. One moment, Judy was valuable as a possible winner. The next, she was yesterday's shot. Groucho Marx famously called the loss the biggest robbery since Brinks. Many agreed, but the deeper insult was not only the award. Hollywood had been willing to praise Judy's pain when it appeared as art. It was less willing to publicly honor what that pain accused. To many people watching, Grace Kelly represented a cleaner, safer kind of Hollywood image. Judy represented something more painful, the cost of the system itself. After that, the rest of her life became a pattern of comebacks and collapses, applause and debt, brilliant nights and humiliating mornings. She could sell out a theater and still owe money. She could make an audience stand and still go back to a hotel with unpaid bills waiting. The IRS became a constant pressure. Financial mismanagement followed her. Judy had earned enormous money across her life, but earning money and controlling money are not the same thing. Studios, managers, lawyers, husbands, taxes, and survival costs took their share. The public saw fame and assumed she was secure. Judy lived the difference. The marriage to Sid Luft produced children, work, conflict, and years of strain. Judy had left MGM, but parts of MGM's structure were still inside her life. The television years showed the same contradiction. The Judy Garland show gave audiences flashes of her greatness. When she was present, she could still command a camera with a turn of the head and a change in phrasing. She could sit beside a guest and make the moment feel loose, human, and alive. She could sing a familiar song and make it sound like it had just happened to her. But television demanded consistency, punctuality, stamina, and a weekly rhythm from a woman whose life had already consumed much of those reserves. The show was expensive, pressured, and unstable. The network wanted a weekly product. Judy could not be reduced to a weekly product. She was a human being with decades of strain built into her body. When the show failed, the industry treated it as proof of her unreliability, not as evidence of how much had already been demanded from her. When she delivered, the business called it talent. When she collapsed, it called it personal failure. There was little space for the middle truth. Judy could be brilliant and damaged at the same time. She could be responsible for some chaos and still be shaped by systems that reached her before she had real power to resist. Her children saw a version of Judy the public did not. Liza Minnelli later pushed back against the easy tabloid picture of her mother as simply self-destructive. Judy had hurt people and made damaging choices, but she had also been worked, shaped, medicated, and used since childhood. Judy's later marriages kept repeating the same pattern. She wanted protection, companionship, and order, while the people around her often stood close to the legend, the work, and the chaos. It is possible to love a star and still benefit from the star's damage. By the late 1960s, Judy was still working because she needed money, and because performing was the language she had known since childhood. In London, her shows could be uneven, some nights extraordinary, some nights painful. Audiences wanted the legend. The woman on stage was living with the cost of being that legend. The press preferred a simple story: difficult star, fading star, troubled star. Those labels kept blame close to Judy and far from the system. They did not ask who put pills into a teenager's routine, who shamed a child's body, or who profited from the cracked voice and wounded eyes. Judy Garland passed away in London in June 1969. She was 47 years old. The official ruling described her death as accidental and connected to barbiturates. That word accidental matters. It was not the clean, dramatic ending the tabloids liked to imply. It was the result of a long chemical history, a body trained for decades to accept pills as part of functioning. MGM executives did not hand her the final dose. The truth does not need that false simplicity. What they helped build was the road toward dependency. Childhood performance, studio pressure, diet control, sleepless schedules, medical management, shame, and fear all sat on that road. Her estate was reportedly small compared with the money her image had generated, with some accounts placing it around $40,000. Even if every financial detail is argued, the larger fact remains. Judy Garland created massive value and passed away with little control over what that value became. The industry kept Dorothy. It kept the songs. It kept the posters. It kept the television broadcasts. It kept the nostalgia. Judy kept the consequences. Her funeral in New York drew enormous crowds. Thousands came to say goodbye. Some mourning Dorothy, some mourning Judy, and some sensing that something precious had been used up. Public grief was real, but it arrived too late. Then the product kept living. The Wizard of Oz continued on television. Over the Rainbow kept playing. Dorothy remained fixed in the clean light of memory, and the ruby slippers became more than costume pieces. They became relics. In 1970, MGM held its famous auction, selling off parts of its own history. A pair of ruby slippers associated with the Wizard of Oz reportedly sold there for $15,000. That figure sits next to Judy's final estate like an accusation. A prop could hold value with less trouble than the woman who wore it. The shoes did not get tired, ask for rest, miss call times, or tell painful truths. They were easier to preserve than the woman who wore them. Decades later, the value of those slippers climbed into figures Judy herself never saw in life. Collectors, museums, auction houses, and fans treated the shoes like priceless Hollywood history. That is not wrong. But the shoes should not only represent movie magic, they also belonged to the teenager who wore them, while MGM controlled her body, schedule, image, and sleep. That was old Hollywood's accounting. The shoes kept gaining value. The woman who wore them never received that kind of care. The public can watch the movie and feel protected from the damage because the damage is not visible unless someone names it. MGM understood that. The dream sells better when the audience does not see the labor behind it. The fantasy is easier to sell when nobody talks about the girl inside the costume. But reducing her to tragedy also protects the industry because it makes the damage look personal instead of manufactured. She was not only the broken star the tabloid sold. She was a worker from childhood. She was a technical master. She understood phrasing, timing, comedy, stillness, and emotional pressure in ways that cannot be manufactured by a studio memo. MGM could shape the frame, but it could not create the soul of the performance. That belonged to her. The crime is that the system took that gift and treated the giver as replaceable. This story is not about blaming one person and closing the case. Ethel Gum pushed the child. Louis B. Mayer and MGM shaped the asset. Studio doctors protected the schedule. Publicists protected the image. Husbands and managers took their turns around the money and the need. Audiences bought the dream. The press sold the collapse. Each person could say they were only doing their job. That is how the system protected itself. No one had to admit to the whole damage. They only had to defend their own part as business. The hardest part of Judy Garland's story is that none of this erased her talent. She was not powerful because she suffered. She was powerful because she knew how to make a song feel alive. The tragedy is that the industry took that gift and treated the person carrying it as a problem to manage. The question at the center has not changed. What was Hollywood protecting? The person or the product? With Judy Garland, the answer sits in the record. When she was hungry, the image had to stay thin. When she was exhausted, the schedule kept moving. When she broke down, the brand kept earning. Even after she was gone, Dorothy went on selling. The studio version wants Dorothy to be the whole story. A girl opens a door, sees color, follows a road, learns that home was always waiting. Judy Garland's real story is harder. A child was put to work before she could consent to the shape of her own life. A teenager was managed by adults who controlled her body. A woman spent decades trying to survive the tools that had once made her useful. She gave the world one of its most beloved songs, and the world kept asking her to sing it long after the cost was clear. That is why Judy Garland still matters. Not because suffering makes art better. It does not. Not because old Hollywood was glamorous in its cruelty. It was not. She matters because her life shows how entertainment can turn vulnerability into revenue and then blame the vulnerable person for the damage. It shows how a child can become a brand before she becomes herself. It shows how applause can hide a system that never learned the difference between care and control. Modern entertainment likes to believe it is different, but the old question remains. When a young performer becomes valuable, who protects the person from the product? A weigh-in can become a fitness clause. A gossip column can become a viral post. A studio contract can become a brand deal. The language changes. The pressure can stay the same. The public got Over the Rainbow. MGM got Dorothy. Judy got a life shaped by applause, debt, love, damage, children, songs, and rules adults had written before she could understand them. She was not only innocent, not only broken, and not only a legend. She was a human being. So when the film plays again and Dorothy looks toward the sky, the question should not be whether the song is beautiful. It is beautiful. The question is what the beauty cost. Who paid for that voice to sound so hungry for escape? Who decided the girl behind it could keep working? Who looked at the exhaustion and reached for a pill instead of a pause? Who saw the money and called the damage acceptable? You are watching Hollywood Dark Secrets. If you want to understand how this system truly operates, subscribe to the channel. We are building a ledger they cannot erase. And we need you watching closely, because the studio story was never the whole story.